Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. Immigration is certainly not a new topic, but debates on immigration policies rage across the country these days, raising so much tension and so much passion. I've asked my friend Shari Moidel, an immigration lawyer, to talk about these policies and help us understand how we decide who can live here, who can't, and why. That is a large order, I admit. So welcome, Shari.
Thank you for having me, Ronnie.
You're very welcome. How do we explain this whole thing?
Well, your opening statement was very interesting because that is the crux of the problem. The nation can't seem to decide how to decide.
Yeah.
And the so-called two sides of the debate are becoming ever more polarized. And the rhetoric is growing, and we need to kind of break down what are the main issues, what are the arguments on both sides, and what really is the wisest way to go forward.
Right. So what do you think the main issues are?
Well, the main issues for those who object to any form of immigration reform that would grant relief to the estimated 11 or 12 million people in the country who are undocumented is twofold. That number one, these are people who broke the immigration law by either sneaking into the country or overstaying their permitted time after entering legally, and therefore they don't deserve any kind of break in the law. And the second is that the undocumented present an economic drain on, more often than not, local government, both the school systems and the medical systems. And I am a member of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, and some of the hard statistics I know of, I get from that organization, who do their homework and get their facts and figures directly from the relevant government agencies. And let's address the first objection, which is illegal entry or overstaying illegal entry. This is being used as the main reason to oppose any form of what the objectionists, I'll call them, refer to as an amnesty. They say, don't you dare pass some kind of earned legalization program, because that is an amnesty, even though you won't call it such, and an amnesty rewards law breaking. I take issue with that. I actually decided to look up the simple Merriam-Webster dictionary definition of amnesty, and it comes from the Greek word for forgetting, like amnesia, and it's defined as a government deciding to pardon an entire group of people. So it's not rewarding law breaking, it's expressly deciding to pardon it. And there are very good reasons why pardon, an act of grace by the government, works for the country, not just for the 11 or 12 million who would directly benefit by it, but for the entire country.
Let me just interrupt you for a minute, because the debate has taken on, I think, such a one-sided picture of this whole question of illegal immigrants or undocumented immigrants. I mean, you talk about the people who are overstayed visas. That's a large proportion of people who have overstayed visas.
Right.
But hasn't most of the attention recently been on the Mexican and Latin American population coming across the border?
Every evening, 6 p.m., Lou Dobbs, CNN, you see Mexicans running through the desert
with it,
as if it's an absolute invasion, and that is the source of illegal immigration.
But frequently there are people who've come on student visas or on visitor visas or even working visas.
They're given
and they
a certain amount of time.
and they've come.
Right, and they decide to stay.
But and it's interesting also in the whole reorganization, and this is such a complicated subject. You've brought some order to it. I told you that I've tried to figure out how we're going to discuss this, and it's so all over the place. But our policy has become Border Patrol, basically. And so that's where all the emphasis is. Anyway, so your question about amnesty is a very important one, because I think a large proportion of the people who are here who are not any longer documented, is that the word? An undocumented.
One can be undocumented, sometimes called an illegal alien, either by having entered the country illegally, surreptitiously, by sneaking into it, or by, after having been admitted legally, just stayed past the period of time that they were supposed to leave.
Right.
So this is why we have the swelling numbers of the illegal population or the undocumented.
Right. Now, the people so you're addressing the objections in the recent debates to the question of amnesty, which is an important ingredient there.
Advocates of immigration reform. See, immigration reform today seems to comprise two main components: increased border security and how do we deal with the undocumented population. And immigration advocate, let me rephrase that, immigration objectionists say this is an amnesty, we oppose amnesty because it rewards lawbreaking.
Right.
And those who favor some kind of remedial legislation are a little bit gun-shy and are trying to contest the notion that it's an amnesty by saying, no, it's an earned legalization. In the legislative proposals we've seen, would-be applicants would have to jump quite a number of tough hurdles. They'd have to demonstrate an employment history, being up to date on their tax paying obligations,
right,
or to pay back taxes, a mastery of the English language, pass security clearances, have a rudimentary understanding of government civics and history, and pay substantial penalties and fines to, if you will, make up for the illegal entry or overstay. So reform advocates are saying that's not an amnesty. It's not granting carte blanche to everybody to just get their green card. They're going to have to jump through these hurdles. And I'm not, the label doesn't concern me. On a certain level, it is an amnesty because you are providing a vehicle for people to regularize their status. But it's not rewarding lawbreaking.
Right, and it's people who've been living here because there aren't any we're not including people who have felony convictions or anything like that. We're just talking about people who've managed to live here, create homes, and have jobs.
And what would the main issue, being pardon be? The technical violation of the civil immigration law that you either entered the country illegally or overstayed your period of admission. As I was saying earlier, there are reasons that are in the country's best interest to grant an amnesty, such as the fact that, as you just pointed out, not including criminals, the undocumented population consists of our everyday neighbors and co-workers.
Right, absolutely. Then so you went, then after amnesty, you went to what?
The economic objections. Are the undocumented a drain on the economy or a potent economic force? And I would submit that, as usual, it's unfair to paint the debate in starkly black and white terms, that like most issues, it's complicated, it's a gray zone. So that, yes, there are local governments that are definitely feeling the financial impact of rapid growth in the undocumented population. However, there's a very practical way to solve this, which is by regularizing people's status. You are expanding the tax base, and that will only facilitate matters going forward.
But even that, a lot of people who are undocumented are paying taxes.
A very large number.
So that is really not as serious an article, is it?
Let me quote an A-list statistic to you.
Yeah.
The undocumented are paying into the Social Security Fund $7 billion a year. Since the last major reform 20 years ago, that number has grown to $189 billion, and the Social Security Agency uses these contributions by the undocumented in terms of their future financial projections. And the undocumented are unable to get the benefits for which they've paid into. They're ineligible for Medicare, they're ineligible for Social Security. That just seems fundamentally unfair.
So then I don't buy this argument that it's costing local governments that much money.
On a case-by-case basis, it may very well be the case, but I'm suggesting there's a very easy way out, which is called regularization of status.
Yes.
And it's unrealistic to think that the government can seek to deport all these people. It's just silly.
I mean, I think they made that point, didn't they? And the idea that we have the manpower or the people power to go around and find all these people.
If we're complaining about the cost of the undocumented population, why do you want to set up a bureaucracy to detain and deport 11 to 12 million people? And of course, again, it's not black and white. There are many blended families where one parent has citizen, one's paperwork is in process. You might have an American-born child. You might have a child still waiting in the home country to be sponsored by their parent. And so there's rarely a straightforward situation when a family comes into my office.
Right.
Okay.
So then you have the other part of the economics where we're lowering the value of work for American wage earners, right? Isn't that one of the arguments?
That is one of the arguments against regularizing the status of those who are already here and are already part of the system.
Right.
And, I'm not an economic expert, but I could tell you that in the existing immigration laws and regulations, there are very many regulations to protect the interests of current U.S. workers, from the employer having to attest that they're paying prevailing wages, to having to attest that there's no strike or lockout at the place of employment at the time that they seek to hire a foreign-born worker. and so on and so forth. So the measures are already in place to make sure that the working conditions and salaries of U.S. workers are not adversely affected by the hire of foreign-born workers.
And immigrants also affect both the top level and the unskilled level.
Well, they cut across the whole fabric
Right.
of society, the entire economic ladder. But what I'd like to do, if I may, pardon me, is point out some of the difficulties and problems of the existing legal immigration system, which is in large part the root problem of our growing undocumented population.
All right, you want to do that? All right, go ahead, let's do that, because
just
that's
as
an
an
important
example,
thing. It's very difficult.
The country has a legal immigration system.
Right.
The Immigration and Nationality Act
What year is that
recognizes...
from?
Well, it's been amended continuously.
Yeah. Where do we start with
1952 was a major overhaul, and then a major overhaul
was the
again was
McCarran-Walter Act, right?
1996, yes. And in 1996, with
right,
the
an
immigration...
act, another time of great suspicion and hysteria.
Correct.
From the McCarthy era.
Correct.
Now we're into terror. Right, all right.
Okay. Now, a period of national security concerns,
Yes.
and therefore a growing concern of who are the people in our midst. And that's a legitimate national security question, but how are we going to deal with it? And the latest major overhaul to immigration law was in 1996, and I would submit it completely backfired. So that if I may, I'd like to talk about, use
Right.
two examples of what's wrong with the existing legal immigration system. So we do have one, and it basically allows U.S. citizens to sponsor parents, spouses, children, and permanent residents, green card holders, can also sponsor spouses, children, sons and daughters. There's a distinction between children who are under age 21 and sons and daughters who are over age 21. Let's suppose you have a Mexican father, Mexican national, who has his green card. He was perhaps sponsored by an employer, and he went through the process, and he finally got his green card. Now he files a family petition to bring in his children, under age 21, minor children. If green card father from Mexico starts the immigration sponsorship for his children today, there will not be a visa available for his children for another 15 years. That's the period of separation this family is looking at. I submit that's unconscionable. When you have an Immigration Act whose stated goal is the reunification of families, to have minor children separated from their parents for 15 years is unconscionable.
Absolutely.
Okay?
Yes.
And the other point we were touching on, we were hopscotching a little bit. Please refresh my memory.
Well, I want to talk about how long it takes once you've applied for a green card to get a green card. It's always,
it depends on your family category.
How it is. That's what it is.
As well as processing times
and
at
where
the
you're
relevant
coming from?
government agencies, as well as where you're coming from. So there are 4 countries, mainland China, India, Mexico, and the Philippines, who have their own visa availability chart carved out from the visa availability chart for the entire rest of the world. And typically their waiting periods are even longer.
What about the Caribbean?
Well,
Caribbean nations. Do they come under England, Trinidad, or?
No, they're
separate.
Nation states in their own right, so they're not treated regionally to the best of my understanding.
I always wondered how quotas were
nation.
set, but it's a long discussion, and there's other things that we want to discuss. How much does race come into the discussion?
Race is the big politically incorrect taboo topic, which I find to be a glaring omission in the current media coverage.
Right.
Yet my gut feeling tells me that when a middle-class suburb of a certain racial composition starts to see groups of Hispanic men on the corners hoping to be picked up as day laborers, there is a xenophobic reaction. And perhaps I'm offending some viewers with this kind of general statement, but I think there is a xenophobic factor at play. But it's just politically incorrect to say so.
I think it's so obviously at play because the debate has been so much on temporary workers, meaning farm workers and other people that are coming from Mexico and Latin America, and not on those people who are living here with expired visas of some kind or another. There hasn't been very much discussion about that, even when they talked about the impracticality of rounding up those people to come, we didn't think of it other than in people of color. I really think that is so obviously one of the basic problems.
It doesn't get covered in the mainstream media, but in fact, as an attorney who has a northern border practice, I know that in fact, so-called mainstream Canadians, university graduates with professional training, no criminal record, those who pass for Americans are encountering problems at the border and facing expedited removal orders if it's discovered that they are living illegally in the United States. And
well, now let's talk about how the Immigration Service has now been divided and really confused with national security. It seems to me it's now under Homeland Security.
Well, in response to 9/11, the federal government did some housekeeping and rearranged their agencies, and now I believe it's 22 agencies that are subsumed under the Department of Homeland Security. And that includes Citizenship and Immigration Services, which is the new name for the Immigration and Naturalization Service, the former INS, sometimes referred to as Legacy INS. And the goals in this reorganization were lofty, I suppose, to eliminate duplication, facilitate communication between agencies that work together on cases, because, for example, in an immigration application, the CIS will communicate with the FBI to make sure security checks have cleared. The Department of Labor is involved. The Department of State is involved. So various agencies were now put together to streamline matters, although I heard a countervailing argument that, in fact, what it's achieved is the opposite, that now you have an even more cumbersome, less nimble bureaucracy, as unresponsive to the demands of its consumer market, in quotation marks, as can be.
Well, certainly in the legislative part, it's more emphasis, isn't it, on border patrols?
Yes. From what I can glean from what I call the immigration objectionists, the predominantly Republican elected leaders, is that they believe that the first order of the day is to secure the borders. It only once America is satisfied that she can control her borders, turn their attention to the plight of those who are undocumented in the country. And
but they're not spending as much time looking at the cargo or even at the transportation facilities, right? I mean, they aren't.
I cannot speak to that since my professional focus is
a
very much on immigration.
I just wanted to mention, because I think it's unprecedented, immigration from Latin America. I mean, I think we go in phases, right? But we've always, I think, preferred or been used to Western European immigration in this country, haven't we?
There are resources out there that review succinctly the whole history of immigration to America. Ira Kurzban is a renowned attorney in Miami who's written what we consider to be the Bible of immigration law. It's a wonderful outline of the entire body of law. And I reviewed it briefly this morning, and the country did begin with what was considered open door immigration, and in about the 1780s, and that went on for about 100 years. And in approximately the 1880s, we began to see the first restrictions, whereby if somebody was a known lunatic or criminal or anarchist, then they were deemed inadmissible. The Chinese Exclusion Act was introduced in the late 19th century, and that remained on the books for quite a number of decades. That was arguably blatantly racist. And then there was a national origin system put into place, frankly, to restrict immigration of Eastern European Jews who were growing in number as they fled persecution in Europe, and whose growing numbers were perceived as a threat by the existing Native Americans. And not Native Americans, Americans, which is, in a way, the whole poetry behind this, because all of us who are not Native Americans descend from immigrants, and not that long ago. So,
and what about from Africa? Do we have?
There's immigration from Africa.
It's not as much, is it? I mean, people tend...
I have quite a number of inquiries from Ghanaians and Nigerians, and there are asylum claimants, women fleeing...
different kinds of...
female genital mutilation and the like. So yes, there is African immigration.
I read when I was trying to prepare for this also a paper, I don't know who wrote it, about myths, especially of Mexican immigration, And the fact that one of the reasons people come here, Mexico, I think, has always been a little different in that it's very obviously cyclical, right? And most of the Mexicans who've come here come and then they go home, and they come and they go home.
In the first half of the century, there was a temporary worker program, and that worked very well, supposedly both for U.S. employers as well as Mexican laborers,
Right.
because they were here legally and they could go back home.
Right.
And this is what President Bush has stated he supports, some kind of a guest worker program where prospective employers and employees who want to build a relationship can. There is a counter argument to that, which is, this could be the beginning of the problem Europe has created for itself with guest worker programs, where those workers who come here as guest workers end up becoming an alienated second class, if you will.
Yeah.
Because invariably, guest workers will fall in love and get married and have children, and they will become more and more part of the larger body politic, and they may not necessarily want to return home permanently. I don't think that necessarily is a bad thing. I think it's a human thing. And
I don't like
to
this.
not have a provision in the law that allows people who are investing in this country and are invested in this country to really truly become part of the body politic, I think will backfire on the country.
I instinctively just am opposed to the guest worker program. I don't like it, but I certainly believe people should be able to come here and become citizens if they want to, or to come here and get a visa that they can stay for a long time and work and participate in our life.
I don't object to a guest worker program as long as it does provide a path to permanent residence and eventually to citizenship for those who wish to become citizens.
But what I thought was so interesting is, why do people come here? They come here to better their lives, I think, usually, either from repression or from all kinds of things, right?
Right, and this is really where my beliefs lie. There's the human spirit, and it's indomitable. And it is, I believe, natural, healthy, and desirable to want to care for oneself and one's loved ones and better one's lot in life. At the same time, being an asset to the society which one is joining. And whenever there's a contentious debate on whatever the issue is, I get a kick out of going back to the dictionary and just looking up the word which is in contention, even though we all think we know what the meaning is. And if I may, I would like to read the definition of citizen from the Merriam-Webster dictionary, because there's a lot of email being sent to Lou Dobbs on CNN where American citizens seem deeply offended that the undocumented are now protesting and demonstrating for their civil rights, their political rights, and citizenship. And the email seemed to say, how dare you think that you have some entitlement to this? You don't. Go back home. But take a look at the definition of citizen. And what does it say? Citizen, a member of a state, a native or naturalized person who owes allegiance to a government and is entitled to protection from it. It means a person owing allegiance to and entitled to the protection of a sovereign state. Citizen is preferred for one owing allegiance to a state in which sovereign power is retained by the people and sharing in the political rights of those people, the rights of a free citizen. In contrast to, let's say, subject, which would be implying owing allegiance to a king. Why? I'm a naturalized American citizen. Why do I want anything less than all my fellow workers and neighbors to be fully participating members in the body politic? I don't want to be living or working next to a second-class citizen or a third-class citizen. I don't think that's good for my country, my adopted country, if you will.
I agree with you. It's the same thing as you don't want to have dilapidated housing on your block. You want it to be as, to fill in. We want everybody to raise to a level. And
so this bill, which passed in the House of Representatives in December,
terrible.
Which with the stroke of a pen seeks to criminalize
everybody.
The undocumented.
And the people who help them, right?
This is astonishing to me.
Yeah. We have 2 minutes. I want to know, what kind of cases do you get?
What kind of cases do I get? I get I would say my practice is divided into 1/3 family law, including naturalization cases, 1/3 business cases, H-1Bs, free trade, work permits. H-1Bs are typically for university graduates,
I see.
people doing higher level specialty occupation professions.
Is it basically for people coming in, or do you defend people who are here?
Both, and 1/3 removal defense. In fact, removal is the new technical term for deportation. So it's deportation defense. And just as an example of how heartless the existing immigration law has become in the past 10 years, there was a law on the books for about 50 years, until 1996, whereby if somebody ended up in removal proceedings and they had no other relief available to them, they could ask the judge for a form of relief called suspension of deportation, whereby if they could prove that it would cause them personally unusual and exceptional hardship if they were deported, the immigration judge had the power to cancel their removal or suspend their deportation, if you will, and give them permanent resident status. In 96, that was changed, that the question of what impact does the person's deportation have on them is no longer a question of law. It does not come into play in a hearing. It's, do you have a qualifying U.S. relative who would suffer extreme and unusual hardship if you are removed? The government, according to the letter of the law, does not care what happens to the person in proceedings.
Yeah, it's
This
terrible.
is extraordinary.
Now, if people want information about where to find information about immigration, does the Association of Lawyers have a website?
There are a number of very good websites. AILA.org, AILA.org is the American Immigration Lawyers Association. It has both a public aspect and one for attorney members. There is USCIS.gov, which is the Immigration Service's own website, which is very good in some ways.
And has forms on it and everything else.
And
then do you have
ILW.com, immigrationlawyers.on-the-web.com. It is a for-profit commercial website in terms of attorneys choosing to advertise with it, but it carries very good, reliable information.
And if somebody wants to contact you, are you on the web?
I am. I have a website, Moidel Visa Law, www.moidelvisalaw.com.
VISALAW.
Those domain names have been used up very well.
Well, thank you. Our time is gone.
Thank you very much.
So thank you very much. I hope we've talked about this. It seems to me we could have another whole half hour or more. So we'll have to think about that and come back again.
Thank you very much for having me.
If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.